April 24th, 1980. Somewhere over the Iranian desert, 8 American men are about to die. Not in combat, not shot down by enemy fighters, not ambushed by Revolutionary Guards. They are going to die in the dark, in the sand, because of a series of decisions that each made sense individually, and together produced one of the most catastrophic military failures in American history. This is not a story about cowardice. Everyone involved was brave. This is a story about complexity, about the weight of political pressure on military planning, about what happens when you ask men to do the impossible with just barely not enough of everything they need. And it begins, like most disasters, not with one fatal mistake, but with 50 small ones that nobody caught in time. Let's go back 6 months. November 4th, 1979, Tehran. A crowd of Iranian students storms the United States Embassy. They take 66 Americans hostage. The images go around the world. The Ayatollah Khomeini calls it a second revolution. Jimmy Carter calls it an outrage. For 4 months, diplomacy produces nothing. The hostages are still there. The television cameras are still there. Every night, American news programs count the days. Day 40, day 70, day 100. Carter is bleeding politically. The 1980 presidential election is closing in, and somewhere in the Pentagon, the planners are drawing up something that has never been attempted before. A direct raid into the heart of Tehran. 66 hostages, 1 compound, heavily guarded, 1,400 kilometers from the nearest friendly territory. The plan they build is called Operation Eagle Claw. And from the very beginning, the people inside it know it is balanced on a knife's edge. Here is what the plan required. 8 Navy RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters launching from the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz in the Gulf of Oman. They fly low at night across 500 miles of Iranian desert to reach a staging point called Desert 1, a dry lakebed in the middle of nowhere, chosen because it was flat enough to use as a temporary airstrip. At Desert 1, the helicopters refuel from 6 C-130 Hercules transport aircraft that have flown in from Egypt. Then the helicopters carry a 90-man assault team, Delta Force, the best operators the United States had, another 260 miles northwest to hide in the mountains outside Tehran. The next night, the operators infiltrate the city in trucks arranged by local agents. They hit the embassy compound simultaneously from multiple directions, free the hostages, and carry them to a nearby soccer stadium. The helicopters come in. Everyone gets out. The C-130s are waiting at an airfield 50 miles away to fly them home. Simple, clean, audacious, and requiring that approximately 40 separate things all go right in sequence in hostile territory, with no margin for error and no good options if any of them went wrong. The planners knew this. The commander, General James Vaught, knew this. The man who would lead the ground assault, Colonel Charlie Beckwith, the founder of Delta Force, knew this. Beckwith asked for 12 helicopters. He was given 8. He said he needed 12 to have a comfortable margin. 6 was the absolute minimum required to carry all the hostages out. 8 was somewhere in between. When you hear that number, 8, remember it. The night of April 24th, the USS Nimitz is sitting in the Gulf of Oman, 100 miles off the Iranian coast. It is 19:30 hours. The sun has gone down. The Sea Stallions are on the flight deck, rotors turning. The pilots are from a unit called Helicopter Combat Support Squadron 1. They are skilled. They are trained. What they are not, and this matters, is trained specifically for this mission. The original concept called for Air Force pilots who had been doing low-level desert flying for months. Somewhere in the planning process, the assignment changed. The reasons were bureaucratic. They almost always are. The helicopters lift off the deck and turn northwest toward Iran. For the first hour, the flight is routine. They are flying at low altitude, under radar, using night vision equipment, navigating by terrain features. 8 helicopters in loose formation, crossing the Gulf of Oman toward the Iranian coast. Then the weather changes. They fly into a haboob. If you don't know that word, you will remember it now. A haboob is a type of desert sandstorm, not the dramatic wall of sand you see in movies. Something subtler and more dangerous. Fine particles suspended in the air, invisible in daylight, nearly impossible to detect at night, filling the atmosphere for thousands of feet, reducing visibility to near zero, and infiltrating every system, every seal, every engine intake on the aircraft. The pilots had been briefed on the weather. The forecast had shown some dust activity. It had not shown this. Helicopter number 5 starts experiencing instrument problems. The pilot can see almost nothing outside. His instruments are giving him contradictory readings. He makes a decision. Abort. He turns around and lands on a road. His crew is recovered later. The helicopter stays in Iran. Helicopter number 2 has a rotor blade crack warning light illuminate. The crew debates it. The warning system on this aircraft had a history of false positives. They press on. Later, the maintenance crews will determine the warning was real. That helicopter eventually makes it to Desert 1, but it is no longer fully airworthy. 6 working helicopters arrive at Desert 1. That is the minimum. Exactly the minimum Beckwith said he needed. Not one aircraft to spare. Desert 1 is not empty when the Americans arrive. This was supposed to be a remote, uninhabited stretch of desert. Instead, within the first hour of the operation, a civilian bus with 44 Iranians on board drives down the road that cuts across the landing zone. They are stopped, held at gunpoint, confused and terrified. Then, a fuel truck tries to run the roadblock. The lead, C-130, fires a LAW rocket at it. The truck explodes. An enormous fireball lights up the desert. A second vehicle, a small pickup, accelerates away into the darkness before anyone can stop it. The Americans do not know who is in that pickup. They do not know if it has a radio. They do not know if somewhere in the Iranian night, someone is now making a phone call to the Revolutionary Guard. The clock is running. And then, helicopter number 6 develops a hydraulic problem. The crew reports it to Desert 1. The Delta Force maintenance team examines it. Their assessment: the aircraft can fly, but it should not fly this mission. Not with what is riding on it. 6 helicopters, 1 down, 5 remaining. 5 is below the minimum. The math is brutal and simple. 5 helicopters cannot carry 90 Delta operators and 66 hostages out of a soccer stadium in the middle of Tehran. The numbers don't work. Colonel Beckwith gets on the radio to General Vaught, who is orbiting overhead in an EC-130 command aircraft. He tells him the situation. 5 birds, not enough. Vaught reports to the National Military Command Center in Washington. President Carter is in the White House Situation Room. He has been there for hours. He authorizes the abort. The decision is made. Eagle Claw is over. Now, the problem is getting out. The plan for departure. The helicopters that are still flyable will lift off first, then the C-130s. The helicopters need to reposition slightly to clear the C-130 refueling area. Helicopter number 3 lifts off from the desert floor. The pilot begins to maneuver in the dark, in residual dust, relying on instruments and the goggles that turn the night into shades of green. And he flies into the EC-130 that is parked on the ground, loaded with fuel. Nobody planned for this. Nobody trained for this. In the chaos of the abort, in the darkness and the dust and the noise of 8 aircraft trying to move at once in a confined space, a helicopter and a C-130 occupy the same coordinates at the same moment. The collision is catastrophic. Both aircraft are destroyed instantly. The fuel ignites. The ordnance aboard the C-130 begins cooking off. 8 men die in the next few seconds. 3 Marines aboard the helicopter. 5 Air Force crew aboard the C-130. The surviving crews abandon their aircraft and run. The remaining helicopters are left behind, with their classified documents aboard, their navigation equipment, their communication codes, intelligence that the Iranians will spend the next weeks exploiting. The survivors load onto the remaining C-130s. They fly out over the Gulf. Behind them, the desert is on fire. The next morning, Jimmy Carter goes on national television and tells the American people what happened. He takes full responsibility. He says the decision was his. He says the mission failed. The images from Desert One, the burning aircraft, the abandoned helicopters, the bodies, go around the world. In Tehran, Ayatollah Khomeini calls it a sign from God. Iranian state television broadcasts footage of the wreckage. The hostages remain in captivity for another 244 days. The aftermath is long and complicated and worth understanding. The official inquiry, the Holloway Commission, identifies failures at every level. The planning was compartmentalized to the point of dysfunction. Units trained separately and only came together for the mission itself. The helicopter crews had never trained with the Delta operators. There was no deputy mission commander. There was no single person whose job it was to look at the whole operation and ask, what happens if 3 things go wrong at once? The Joint Special Operations Command, JSOC, is created directly as a result of Eagle Claw. The Special Operations community is rebuilt from the ground up. When Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 operate in Grenada in 1983, they are better. When they go into Panama in 1989, they are better still. When they reach Iraq and Afghanistan, the architecture that enables those operations traces directly back to the lessons bought at Desert One. The 8 men who died in the Iranian desert did not die for nothing. They died in a failure that forced a rebuild. Sometimes that is how progress works. Colonel Charlie Beckwith, who had fought to get 12 helicopters, who had said 6 was the minimum, who had watched the mission collapse at the exact point he had warned it would, did not quit. He went back to Fort Bragg. He testified. He wrote his memoirs. He spoke plainly about what went wrong and why. He understood that failure is the only honest teacher. Success hides things. Failure shows you exactly where the weakness was. Eagle Claw showed the United States military exactly where it was weak. The next generation fixed it. The 8 men who died that night in the Tabbas Desert, Staff Sergeant Dewey Johnson, Sergeant John Harvey, Corporal George Holmes Jr., Staff Sergeant Mal Baker, Technical Sergeant Harold Lewis, Captain Richard Backey, Captain Charles McMillan, Staff Sergeant Joel Mayo. Their names are in the doctrine that was rewritten because of what happened to them, in the training pipelines that exist today because of what failed that night. They were not the heroes of a successful mission. They were the men who died in a failure that changed everything that came after. Sometimes that is what service looks like. Not a statue, not a medal ceremony, a lesson paid for in full by men who had no idea they were paying it. If you made it to the end of this video, you understand why these stories matter. Not because they are triumphant, not because they end well, but because they are honest, because the men in them were real. Military history told the way it deserves to be told. Subscribe. New video every week.